Hi, and welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and today we have a super special guest, Andy from Sober in 7. He is a life coach, and he has a wonderful story about his sobriety and his addiction, and he's going to share it with us today. So, Andy, thank you so much for coming on with us and sharing with us today.
My absolute pleasure. I really enjoy kind of sharing, a little bit of my experience with regards to this kind of journey. I think it's one of these things that we're getting much better at talking about, mental health, addiction, and all these kind of things. So thank you so much for the invite. I really appreciate it. I love what you're doing with your podcast, and it's a privilege to be a part of it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And we want to dive right in. So you can start sharing as much of your story as you want to.
Sure. I mean, I think, my sort of key thing was alcohol addiction. I grew up on a small Scottish island in the Shetland Islands, which is right off to the north of the UK, actually slightly closer to Norway than it is to the kind of main parts of Scotland. And I grew up in a small island, 7 miles by 300 people on it. Not a lot to do growing up, and a lot of your social life revolved around alcohol, a big drinking culture. And actually, we owned the pub, the bar, and on the island, the only bar on the island. So our very existence was dependent on people consuming alcohol in our house, and it was just really interesting how that kind of shaped my relationship with alcohol, which then kind of permeated through my adult life. And it was just really interesting that I think I grew up in a culture, certainly as a young man, back in the 1970s, 1980s, where you're almost like your manhood was defined by how much you could drink alcohol. It was quite a yardstick to use, whether you could, drink a bottle of whiskey and hold it down or not pass out or whatever. And it was just interesting that I went away to university in Edinburgh in the mainland of Scotland, and obviously party, and then got into the professional world. And again, I think all of the kind of foundations were laid in my kind of early years with regards to my relationship with alcohol. So I used it to celebrate. I used it to relax. I used it to give me confidence. And then, life progresses as it does. You get to more senior jobs, got married, got a family, got kids. And yet the drinking was kind of always there as being, I often joke about kind of, relationships came and went, jobs came and went, diets came and went. But the one thing that I was only ever really consistent at was the drinking. And it was just becoming quite an issue. My marriage ended, and alcohol was a big factor in that. And I got to 50 years old, and I really was at the place where I thought, I'm genuinely killing myself with this stuff here. I really felt like I was poisoning myself. And I'd been trying on and off for probably between 10 and 20 years to try and really get a shift in my relationship with alcohol. And I tried a lot of the what you would call traditional methods. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to see my doctor. I went to a local rehab center. I went to Smart Recovery, and I went to a hypnotherapist, and none of it worked. And I just thought, wow, I'm really, screwed here. That there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I couldn't kind of, I guess, understand the duality of somebody who was so successful. I had a very, very successful career. I won awards. I smashed sales records. I was running dental companies, pharmaceutical companies, veterinary companies, all across the healthcare spectrum. And yet on the inside, I just felt like I was, just a shambles, about to get found out. Um, and it all came to a head about 8 years ago now, or early 2017. And I was, and it's funny because I used to work very hard, and I kidded myself that I would use alcohol to relax. And one day in my local store, in my local supermarket, excuse me, I had a panic attack, a massive panic attack. I thought I was having a heart attack. And I literally collapsed into one of the meat fridges, and my skin was on fire. My heart was hammering out my chest. I was dizzy, and I got helped up by this little old lady who was asking me if I was okay. And I said, "Oh, I just slipped or whatever." And I remember just sitting there for a moment while I was trying to gather myself, looking down at my feet and thinking, "Wow, you're really in trouble here." And and I guess, some people talk about rock bottom and things like that. I mean, for me, I was very much of the view that I didn't want to get to that place where I'd lost everything, and I was trying to take proactive steps. But I guess that's probably as close as I got to my own kind of personal look. I'm not willing to put up with this any longer. But I had no idea, given that I tried all of these things, I had no idea how to overcome this. And I'd been in therapy. I was working with a guy, and he was adamant that there must be some trauma that I was, hiding or trying trying to numb out with the alcohol. And it was really interesting because my life has been pretty good. I mean, I'm adopted. I'm a child of the 60s, but I've always had an amazing relationship with my parents. They've always been super honest about the situation. They've always said if I wanted to go and find my natural parents, it would never stand in my way. And I'm very grateful. I'm 58, coming on 59 years old, and both my parents are still alive. I've got a fantastic relationship with them. But I told this therapist, and I think about the second session, that I was adopted, and I could see his eyes light up, and he went, okay, and he spent 18 months and thousands of pounds of my money trying to convince me that this was a problem. This was the reason why I was drinking. And it was just completely wrong. And, and it's interesting doing what I do now, there is this narrative that people with addiction are suffering from some kind of massive trauma. And don't get me wrong, some are, make no mistake. I work with lots of people who suffer from grief, abuse, other traumatic experiences. But a lot of people are just addicted to alcohol. They're kind of like me. They grew up in a place where it was, not only permissible, but it was actively encouraged. Alcohol's addictive, and if you consume enough of it for long enough, you will get hooked. And so that kind of moment in the supermarket was a real wow. I have to do something about this. I was in a new relationship. I've got a new young son. I mean, he's coming on 11 now. And I thought, I'm not going to be around to see him grow up, and he needs a dad. I kind of owe him that. And so that kind of put me into an interesting kind of frame of mind where I was kind of questioning everything. And the irony for me was that I was really good at changing how other people felt about things in my professional career. I was a really good salesman. I was a really good influencer, really good coach. And yet I didn't seem to be able to kind of deal with what was going on in my head. And something very interesting happened a few days after that event, where I was the usual thing, up, showered, big long drive to get to a meeting, jumped in the car, driving too fast, not sure whether I probably should have been driving. I'd drunk a lot the night before. Um, and I was working my way through the town where I was, where I'm living, and there's a railway crossing, a level crossing, as we would call it in the UK. And I'm running late, so I've got my foot down, and then the lights start to flash that the barriers are about to come down. And of course, so I floor it, and I'm kind of like, right, I'll see if I can beat the barriers, and it's perfectly clear I'm not going to make it. So I get to about 50 yards from the barriers and slam the brakes on, and I'm screeched to a halt, and the barriers come down, trains going past, and I'm just sitting there stewing in my own juice because I am, wondering what the hell is kind of what I'm going to do about this. And the Michael Jackson song, "The Man in the Mirror," came on, and I've heard that song, and I'm sure you've heard it hundreds of times before, and you know the words and all this kind of stuff. But there was something about that moment when I was sitting there with my heart pumping, all adrenalized from basically trying to kill myself by playing chicken with a train. And it was the chorus that just landed differently that day. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And I was looking at myself in the rearview mirror, and and it was one word, changed my entire life. And this is the thing that what I found is inspiration comes from very interesting and quite often unexpected place. But when it does, it's extremely profound. And that one word, I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And I just literally asked myself the question out loud. I was looking at my reflection in the mirror, and I just went, are you up for this? Are you willing to do what it takes to sort this out? And it was almost like somebody else answered the question and just went, yeah, I'm ready. And actually understanding now what I do about the subconscious mind, because quite often we tend to deliver messages to our subconscious, which are, quite disabling. Things like, oh, I'm useless, or I can't do that, or I'm an alcoholic, or things like that. And your subconscious can't do anything with that information. It's just delivered as a fait accompli. And so your subconscious, which doesn't discriminate, just goes, okay, you're an alcoholic. Okay, fine. Let's do what an alcoholic does. But when you pose a question, it starts working on your behalf. So I called my boss up and I said, look, I'm not well. I'm not going to make this meeting. And I took a few days off. And there's a lovely little lake near where I live. And I drove home. I went and got all of the information, all the coaching courses, the selling courses, all of these folders that were in the back of the cupboard. I'm pulling it all out, and I pushed it all into the car, went down to this lovely little lake near where I live. And I just thought, right, okay, I'm just going to park up here, and I'm going to work this out. I know when I'm working with other people, changing how they feel, I know how that works. I need to now work out, how do I apply that to me? And I literally sat there for 3 days, dawn till dusk. And there was something actually quite nice about being in a car. So I've got the stuff all spread out over the seats and the dashboard, and there's people walking past with their dogs looking at me thinking, what is this guy up to, And but I thought the answer's in here somewhere. And I'm not going to look outside the car. The answers are in here, and I'm going to get super focused. And so over time, what happened was I just started to kind of patch together a kind of a process. And I thought, well, if this was somebody else, I would start by doing this, and then I would probably do a bit of this, and then we would add in a bit of that, and then we'd reinforce it by doing this, and then we'd make a plan. And so I kind of sketched out this 7-step process, hence Sober in 7, which is the name of the thing.
Mhm.
And I interestingly enough, some of the things that I'd done, or some of the things that I put in it, I tried before, but I tried them sort of singly as one-offs.
Mhm.
And um, and I went, no, I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to work my way through this, and I will not quit until I've actually finished this process. And as I worked through it, and I was starting to do this work that I'd kind of committed, I just started to feel differently.
Mhm.
And I could feel little shifts starting to happen. And I remember going back and saying to my partner, Louise, and I said to her, I said, I said, there's something's happened here. I can't explain it, but I feel differently, and I want to take a break from alcohol um, and just kind of see where this goes. I was pretty adamant at this point that I didn't want to give up altogether,
Mhm.
because again, I was quite heavily programmed as a young man that, if you can't had your drink, as they would say in Scotland, then, you were a loser, a failure, and I really genuinely believed that. It sounds crazy saying that now, but I genuinely bought that hook, line, and sinker. And so I didn't want to give up altogether. But actually, what I've realized is that was actually not a bad thing, because it meant I didn't put myself under too much pressure right at the outset to do the never again.
Mhm.
And and I said to Louise, I said, something's happened here. She was like, well, we'll see, won't we? Because she, you know, she was incredibly supportive of me, and but was terrified about what I was doing to myself. And I could see, and it was a shame, because I was kind of really hoping for her to be delighted for me, and she was um, hopeful, but you could see in her eyes it was kind of like, well, we've been here before, haven't we? And so let's just see. Um, and it was a shame, because I couldn't explain to her how different I felt. And that's what started me on a kind of a journey of kind of going, okay, if I took a break from alcohol, how might I feel? And, it's quite interesting. I'd got no idea. I'd been drinking all my adult life. Who is Andy Smith if he's not got a drink in his hand? And that was a scary question. And I just thought, well, I need to go and meet this guy and see what he's like and see whether I like him or not. And turns out I like him a bit better than drinking
Mhm.
Andy Smith. But anyway, I mean, I'll shut up for a second. But this has been quite the journey. You
Mhm.
know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I love that story. Oh my gosh. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking of 1,000 things to talk about. So one thing that to start out with, um, I would like to point out is that you said, sometimes people have trauma, sometimes people have bad things that happen, but you grew up with the drinking. And, sometimes that happens too. And I don't think people understand how important it is in those younger years and how it develops who you are, what you do. And you got to where that was your bar of measure. Like you said, you had to drink a bottle of whiskey if you wanted to be a man, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And and that gets in your head as a measure of who you are. And if you don't measure up, then you're not good enough. Is that how you felt?
Absolutely. And it's interesting when, and as I say, some people do have feelings that they're trying to suppress. Um, but quite a lot of people are going, I don't understand how I ended up here. And And I often say to them, well, I do, because actually the pressure, in modern society to consume alcohol is relentless. I mean, I actually went back to that same supermarket where I collapsed, and I was walking around, and actually one of the things that I've learned on this kind of journey is I'm now curious about everything. I've always been a very curious person. I've got a degree in physics because I've always been fascinated in just how stuff works. Why does that happen? And and now I find myself just being the observer in so many things. And I was in that same supermarket and I was shopping for a birthday card or something. And I was picking up card after card. And I was like, wow, all of these things are basically saying, it's your birthday, get drunk. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to count these. And I went through all of the adult birthday cards. 65% of them basically were saying, it's your birthday, you need to be consuming alcohol. And and that stuff is subtle. These are just birthday cards. But it's again, when you understand how the subconscious mind works, you don't even question this, but it just goes in as a reinforcement, another reinforcement that and and it's interesting when you work with people. I work with people for sort of 6 months we sort the drinking out pretty quickly, but at some point you come up against a lot of the reasons why perhaps you've not been successful in the past. And sometimes, a birthday will come up. And it's really interesting where people start to question. They're like, oh my goodness, it's my birthday. What am I going to do if I'm not drinking alcohol? And you start to see the kind of the end point of all of these little micro influences that have been very subtle. You turn on a TV program, it's somebody's birthday and they're sitting there, with their glasses of wine. They're, having a beer. They're all this kind of stuff. And this is relentless. And until you start to kind of question it, it just flies under the radar. It's very subconscious. And it really has an influence. And actually, when you get kind of hooked on this kind of stuff, and I think this is kind of applicable to both people who are dealing with traumatic feelings, and people who have just kind of slid into addiction, is if you look at the energy of emotions, when we experience certain emotions, some of them are incredibly empowering. And I mean, you can test this in the lab. When if you're lifting weights in a gym, yeah, in a laboratory setting, if you get somebody to focus on somebody that they love, uh, or something that makes them happy, they will be pretty strong. Whereas if you get somebody to focus on something they feel an incredible amount of guilt or shame around, even without sharing it, just focus on it, you find they have almost no strength at all. And this is how our bodies react to different emotions that we hold. And so things like fear, grief, anger, are very negative emotions, and it's perfectly understandable to want to blot those out. And so if you've got those emotions, and take for example grief, although it may surprise you to hear me say this, sometimes I think alcohol can be useful if you're in acute, and you need to just take some of that pain away. I get it. People will go, I just need to take the edge off this because it's almost too much to bear. But quite often people then get to the point they go, well, hang on a minute, I'm now becoming reliant on this, and it's becoming its own kind of problem. But when people get hooked in on this kind of stuff, quite often there is this kind of self-serving sort of guilt and shame cycle where you wake up in the morning going, oh, I feel maybe I'm hungover, but actually I've just got this gnawing kind of, um, you know, self-loathing and guilt about what I'm doing. It's just not who I am and things like that. And then you go through the course of the day suffering with that feeling, but you've programmed yourself that alcohol will take that feeling away. So you go, well, okay, I thought I was going to be strong and I'm not going to drink today, but actually I've got this feeling that I can't quite put my finger on. Again, it's subconscious. Um, and I've programmed myself, my subconscious mind says, I know something that can make you feel better, even for a little while. And so that cycle plays out again, and people have another drink. You wake up with the exact same guilt and shame, but then alcohol makes it feel a little bit better for a while. And sometimes when I speak to people or partners, for example, and they're saying, they've got a real drink problem. I say, well, yes, but actually, what you kind of need to understand is if you've not struggled with this yourself, the drinking is the solution to a slightly different problem that the addict can't quite understand. But they just know that momentarily they feel a wee bit better when they take that. And that's quite an interesting thing sometimes when people don't really understand that in terms of, they'll say things like, well, they just need to have more willpower, or they need to make better choices and things like that. For me, the very definition of addiction is the inability to make the right choice. I don't think there is any addict out there that is going, I love this stuff.
Right.
Everybody hates it, but when challenged, and I know I was like this, I was very defensive. It's like, somebody would criticize my drinking, I would become incredibly defensive because I hated myself for what I was doing. And I couldn't bear the thought of anybody else joining it because I was right at my limit of this amount of self-loathing I could take. And if anybody else was to criticize me, I would bite back because it was just simply too much.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody was to say, okay, what has been the main benefit of putting the booze away, I would say it's that I don't wake up hating myself every morning. Turns out Andy Smith, the non-drinker, I kind of like him. And, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I am a better friend. I am, I think, a better father to my kids. I'm certainly a better partner to Louise. And I'm healthier. I've gone on to do some, my physical and mental health was terrible when I was drinking. And now I've gone on, I do a lot of cycling challenges for kids' charities. I've ridden the course of the Tour de France. I have ridden my bike up to Mount Everest base camp. I've ridden across the Arctic. And I sometimes people say, oh, you do all these things for charity. That's great. You're such a lovely person. And I'm like, well, that's very kind of you to say. But actually, it's a little bit of an antidote to all of the years of self-loathing. And by doing things that make me feel a bit better about being me, I take that stuff seriously now. And I do things that kind of are more compatible with the person that I'm trying to be. And it's an ongoing, I'm a work in progress, but I feel like I've been given a second shot. I think it sounds kind of weird to say it's almost like you've been sort of reborn or whatever, but it's kind of like, what, this is my second go at life almost. Where I'm a bit braver, I'm a bit kinder, I'm more patient. And it's kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that you're talking about the subconscious and the real root of the problem, because I feel like so many people are like, well, if it's not there, you're not going to do it. But it's not what that's about. It's not about the whatever it is the target of the addiction, be it alcohol, drugs, shopping, eating, whatever it is.
Yep.
It's not that it's not there, but it's that you dived in and you understand yourself better. You understand what's happening better so that you can say no. I love your definition of addiction with not being able to make good choices, because
Yeah.
that's the bottom line, right? I mean, it can't be simpler than that.
Yeah, and sometimes people will say, well, they're making the wrong choice, and it's kind of that's an external judgment. It's kind of like, well, you're making a choice that I feel like you should take. But the kind of the missing piece of this is the person who's addicted to something is making the choice that they also feel is wrong, but almost daren't admit it. And it's kind of like, I hate this. It started off as being maybe fun when I was younger, but it's not fun anymore. And yet I keep on doing it. And that really rots away at your self-esteem when you don't feel like you're actually in control. I used to, I would, be driving home from work, and I would drive into this self-same supermarket. I feel like I'm spending a lot of time there, but I would walk in there, and I would be going, right, okay, I'm going to go and get dinner for the family, and I'm not going to drink tonight. I'm going to have a night off, and I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll feel better and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yep, okay. In I go. And then 20 minutes later, I'm pushing the trolley back to the car with 2 bottles of wine and a bottle of gin and clinking away in it. And I'm thinking, I, I'm not even in control over what I spend my money on here. That all that process of the course of 15, 20 minutes of feeling really definitive and positive about what I was going to do, and that just dismantling itself inside my head in such a short period of time with excuses, uh, with and actually the subconscious's greatest weapon is excuses, is the story that we concoct to kind of justify what we're doing, and it's a fear-based response. It's I am scared of leaning into this, so here are all the reasons why I'm not going to do that. And it's great because the subconscious concocts this story, which is perfectly curated just for you, makes perfect sense. It's a bit like, nightmares, having a bad dream. If you explain your bad dream to somebody else, they quite often go, okay, yeah, I'm sure it was scary. It doesn't sound that scary to me, but it's your personal nightmare. It plays on your deepest, darkest fears, not everybody else's. And this whole kind of voyage, this whole journey is, and I think this was the gift of the Michael Jackson song for me, is it allowed me to step out of myself just for a moment and kind of go, okay, the answers are not in my head. I need to get out of my head. Probably a poor turn of phrase given what we're talking about, but and kind of and start to be the observer a little bit and start to externalize this a little bit. There's one of my clients, a guy called Chris. He's great. He's got a really good turn of phrase, and he said something to me. And he said, he says, you can't see the label when you're inside the jam jar. And that is exactly how I felt. I thought, I am stuck in my own jam jar, and the answer is out there written on that label, but I just cannot see it. And you need some help with that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I love that you're stuck in a jam jar and you can't see the label. That's amazing. And but you say something so interesting, because you know, it it's true for me too, and I think it's true for a lot of people. Um, how inspiration comes quickly, but it's so profound. And like you said about the Michael Jackson, so with me, I think my point of inspiration was just an encounter with a stranger, did
Yeah.
not know them, and it was just one sentence and some action, and that was all it took, and it just kind of turned my whole mental outlook around, and it made me, it was like my aha moment. And
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that, because I feel like it's so important, especially now in the climate of the world right now, that it's so important to just be kind and do simple things for each other. It doesn't have to be anything big, but how it can make such a big difference.
Yeah. And you know, we all impact on other people. And you know, yep, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world which is kind of scary. And we see the sub the darkness that exists in all of us sometimes being enabled and encouraged almost. And uh and I think to lean into that kind of positive side, and this has a huge impact. You know, you can inspire other people. I mean, one of the kind of real kind of things that I always kind of chuckle about is considering the state I was in physically, and now I've kind of got myself fit again, and I'm healthy. You know, pretty much every single health issue I had is cleared up. Um, and I'm now I teach indoor cycling. You know, I teach spin classes at my local gym, and I do a lot of visualization work and things like that. And sometimes people come up to me and they will say, "Wow, I just needed that today. There was something I was getting them to on. You know, we're on a long climb. Everybody's pedaling away. We're in a dark room." And I will say to them, "Just look, close your eyes, imagine this, or think of somebody that you love, or something that you're grateful for." And there was one guy came up to me and he said, I walked into that class. I nearly didn't come, and I teach very early in the morning, and he said I walked out feeling 10 feet, and you know, and we all have that ability to just, you know, light other people's candles. You know, I remember seeing a meme something around, you know, it's like if you have two candles and one of them's unlit and yours is lit, you can light their candle from yours and it takes nothing away from you. And you know, we're here to spread love. We're here to spread kindness. There have been countless studies shown. I mean, I talk a lot about the kind of the neuroscience of addiction, about dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is pleasure, we conflate with happiness, and it's very different. Serotonin is happiness, and it tends to be much more social, much more kind of you know, out with us, rather than pleasure. It tends to be a very solitary thing. And there've been lots of studies done about random acts of kindness. Whereas if you do something nice for somebody, they've measured this, that the person who receives that act of kindness, their serotonin levels go up. The person who does the act of kindness, their serotonin levels go up. And actually, anybody who witnesses the act of kindness, their serotonin levels go up. And you know, and I was talking earlier about kind of vibration of emotions. If you lift somebody else's emotional vibration, it feels amazing. Somebody once said to me, they said, you don't like or dislike anybody. You like or dislike how you feel when you're with them. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so we get the opportunity to make people feel in a certain way. So we can belittle them, we can threaten them, we can make them feel scared, we can make them feel nervous, or we can make them feel valued or loved, or, you know, that person who's looking sad when you're, you know, standing on a railway platform on your morning commute to work. You know, just, you know, if they're looking a bit downbeat, you can just smile at them and say, you know, I like your coat, or, you know, um, you know, where did you get your bag from? I think that's lovely. That's one of the nicest I've seen. And just watch them, you know, just a little bit. And we have the power to do that every day. And, I was back in that same supermarket again, but there was a little old lady, and this is like this week, and I sometimes do this, not to share. I just do it, but I'll kind of in this context, it's probably worth sharing. But there was a little old lady in front of me in the queue. She was paying for her shopping. It was £32.55. What's that in US? That's about $40. And she was literally counting out the last of her coins. And this was obviously her shopping for the next few days. And she was going, and I've got an Apple Watch, so I just sit and double click the little button. I leant over to the cardless thing, and I paid for her shopping. And of course, then that ensues a certain conversation. She's looking at me and kind of like the lady on the till was explaining to her about, well, this man's just paid for your shopping. And she looked instantly threatened. It's kind of like, oh, what does he want? And I have a little story that I say when I do this. I say, look, somebody did something really nice for me the other day, and I said that I would just pay it forward. So I wanted to do something nice for somebody else. So I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind. I don't mean to insult you or patronize you, but I feel kind of duty bound because of what they did for me to do something nice for somebody else. So I hope you don't mind, but I paid for your shopping. And then eventually, she's kind of, well, thank you very much. And I said, look, you go and do something nice that's within your gift for somebody else. I don't mind, but I wanted to do that. And I hope you don't. And of course, the lady on the till is just beaming at this point. She's like, wow, I never see this kind of stuff going on. And I'm not saying that to kind of, do the kind of white knight syndrome or anything like that. Because again, going back to what I was saying, I would have been very, very comfortable spending £32.55 on 2 bottles of wine and a bottle of gin to make myself completely and utterly effing miserable. And now I invest that money in my happiness and hopefully a little bit of happiness for other people. And again, this is just that shift around going from being an introverted pleasure junkie to trying to spread a little bit of happiness, a little bit of joy through the world. And, this doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be money or anything involved. It's just about being nice. It's paying somebody a compliment without being weird about it. It's, asking if somebody's okay, if they're looking sad. It's just the little things. And I think in our busy lives, we sometimes forget all this stuff. We're just so focused on ourselves. And actually the real pleasure comes from when you look externally, because we are social animals. We are designed to operate, in a community, in a herd, in a family group. If there's somebody that, you really value in your life that you've not spoken to for a while, send them a text message and just say, I was thinking about you this morning, and I just wanted you to know I'm just really grateful for your friendship. And just watch what happens, but do it with no kind of thought of return. But just, you'll light somebody's day up with this kind of stuff. And you don't do it for you. You just do it for them. You do it to kind of spread a little bit more love in the world, because boy, do we need that right now. Yes. And just, let people know that they're valued, they're loved, and that kind of stuff. And just, make it a priority. But, as well to yourself. One of the biggest things that I work with people is getting them to congratulate themselves on little wins. So for example, in the early stages when people are getting sober and things like that, they're dealing with the roller coaster of emotions and all this kind of stuff. And, I use humor quite a lot. And sometimes you'll get somebody like, yeah, but there was this and that happened. I wasn't quite perfect at that and all that. And I'm like, okay, yeah. By the way, can I just ask a question? Did you wake up hating yourself this morning? Well, no, but I kind of like, I say, I'll ask the question again. Did you wake up hating yourself this morning? Well, no. Okay. So that's a win. With all the other stuff that your ego is beating the crap out of you, you started the morning in a good frame of mind, not regretting what you did previous evening. And that's a win. And if you ignore that, you ignore that at your peril, because your subconscious mind needs a compass bearing. So, each time you do something that is moving you in the direction that you want to be going, you need to say to your subconscious mind, please, can I have more of this? And the way you do that is by stopping, feeling that emotion, whether it's relief, pride, or whatever it is, gratitude, and just give it 10 seconds to just sit. Because your subconscious communicates with you through emotions, it'll communicate with you through gut feel. So if you want to talk to it, you talk to it with emotions, and the emotions that you choose to emphasize. And what happens is your subconscious goes, oh, okay, so that was good, was it? All right, then let's do that again. Because all it's trying to do is carry out your instructions. And if your instructions for years have been, if I have a bottle of wine, I will feel better, your subconscious goes, okay, I get it. Right, let's have the wine. And it's just acting. We kind of think that there's this kind of almost malevolent presence within us, but it's not. It's all it is it's just kind of, it's doing what you ask, and you just have to ask it to do something different. And I know this sounds simplistic, but it's remarkably straightforward. But it's a bit like saying, well, if you want to lose weight, well, eat less, move more. Like, okay, but actually making that happen in your life is a never-ending battle of choices, about making the right choices. And so you have to do some inner work in order to make different choices, because most of your choices are on automatic pilot.
Yes, definitely. Oh, I love that. I love that we basically need to make choices and need to talk to our subconscious because, like you say, everything is very simple. It's very basic, very simple, but it's the execution
Yeah,
that makes it so complicated. It's getting yourself to actually do it or actually believe it or actually
yeah.
think it. Um, so that's really a good point. Now, in our discussions, you talk about your seven step process. And I remember earlier when we were getting to know each other, you were talking about how you would go into like an AA meeting and you would say that doesn't work for me. I just don't
Yeah,
like it. It doesn't. And I know a lot of people that are struggling with addiction feel the same way. They don't want to go to an AA meeting because they're like, I don't want to stand up in front of people. I don't want to hear those words. I don't want to say those things because it's just beating me down. But can you give us some pointers or just tell us some basic uh, steps or things about your process and how you deal with things?
yeah. And I think, yeah, when I was sat in an AA meeting, and I I think there was a couple of things that kind of struck me about it, which made me think, okay, this is not for me. One was, I was looking at people who'd been there 20 years, seeing exactly the same thing as the people who've been there 20 days. And I was thinking, well, where's the progression? All of these people are still living a day at a time. They're going to countless meetings. And I thought, I want to sort this out and kind of move on. I don't want it to define me. And the other thing was, when they're all stood up, hello, my name's Dave and I'm an alcoholic. I thought, well, I don't I don't want to be an alcoholic. That's why I'm here. I want something different. And yet I it felt like it needed to become a badge of honor. And it was really defining these people. And I thought, everything I know about influence and psychology, if you want to, lose a problem, you don't just sit there and reconfirm the problem every day. If you call yourself an alcoholic every day, you're an alcoholic every day. But then the narrative is you've got an incurable disease, and and if you don't call yourself an alcoholic, then you're in denial. And I'm kind of like, sorry, I cry BS on that one, because my experience here, I'm 8 years down the road and I'm not living a day at a time. My life has improved by every measure. And I cannot think of one scenario that would make me want to go back, But so my kind of whole approach is very different and can be quite challenging to some of these people. Sometimes I get into debates with AA people, and it's kind of, it's kind of tiring. But but I'm a big believer that if something feels like a positive move, then it's much more sustainable. So the first thing, in terms of the 7 steps, I mean, that I do it around the word freedom, and the F in freedom stands for focus. It's like, what are you going to focus on? You can either focus on living a day at a time, not really focus on anything, just getting by, or you can focus on, well, what do I have to gain? What is this gift that I am looking to give myself? That, if I look at the aspects of my life where I know alcohol is having a detrimental effect, well, what's the flip side of that? If my health is going to improve, well, what would I do with better health? What would that mean for my life if it's going to help my relationships? Well, how would that kind of manifest itself in my life? So I take people through a process, even though they're not where they want to be, but it's actually, let's give your subconscious mind a compass bearing. Let's have a destination in mind in terms of where you're going. And then we work towards that. And when you've got, that clear and compelling vision about where you're going. And again, I know that AA people will say, well, you don't project, that's too much. It's too dangerous. You're projecting too far ahead. I'm like, no, you have to have a sense of direction. Yes, of course, you're not getting there in one step. And we've talked about moments of inspiration and things like that. And there will be powerful moments along the way, but consistency is absolutely key. Repetition. If you want to reprogram your subconscious mind and you want to rewire the neural pathways that are in your head, you have to be consistent. And and sometimes, you speak to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I'm doing really well, but I'm still drinking on Friday and Saturday. It's like, well, you might as well just carry on, because what you're not doing is you're not actually giving yourself a chance to kind of leave this behind, to get some distance with it. NASA did an amazing experiment in the 60s with the astronauts in the space program, where they made them wear convex goggles, which had the effect of flipping the image that their eyes saw upside down, because they were trying to work out how would they deal with the disorientation of zero gravity, like that. And so they had to wear these goggles 24/7, and they're all stumbling around. Some of them are being sick, they're getting headaches and all this kind of stuff. Something very interesting happened. Between day 25 and day 30, one by one, they all started flipping the image the right way up. So their brain worked out, it's like, okay, I need to invert this image. And if you think about how the eye works, the image that hits the back of your retinas is upside down. So your brain is inverting it. But every single one of these astronauts learned that actually, okay, I don't have to do that anymore. And their brain remapped itself and they flipped the image the right way up. And they were like, isn't that interesting? So this is where a lot of this, because there is a habitual side to addiction. And this is where the saying it takes 30 days to break a habit comes from, So actually, by not drinking, for 30 days, that habitual side of it will start to really drop away. Because you will have created new habits as you've gone on. So, but NASA did an interesting thing. They repeated the experiment with a different group, but what they did was they gave that group a break at about day 15, about halfway through what they knew was kind of happening. They were allowed for 24 hours, take the goggles off, go about your normal business, and then they recommenced the experiment. And that second group took a further 25 to 30 days to flip the image. Consistency is key. That one break set the whole thing back to zero. So if you want to rewire your brain, and a lot of this is about little things done consistently. It's not the big grandiose gestures. It's about going, right, what are the simple things? What are the little things I'm going to commit to that are going to help me to get through this? And sometimes people say, well, I can't go for a walk every night for the rest of my life to distract myself from the fact that I want a glass of wine when I'm like, you don't have to. You just have to do it for 30 days. And then that kind of, you've got a much more manageable routine.
Yeah.
And then you can go and you can get on. Or maybe by the time 30 days are up, you're starting to go, actually, I really like my 6 o'clock walk. It's a big, big part of my decompression strategy. And actually, I don't want the wine when I come in because actually I feel relaxed. I feel like I've put the trials and tribulations of the day behind me. And actually, it's great because I don't hate myself for going for a walk. Whereas I would have been if I'd had 2 bottles of wine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that you say you base the 7 steps around freedom, and that's
Yeah.
so amazing because it's true of any addiction, and really of anything in life, just freedom. That's really all we're wanting, something to relieve the pressure so that we can be a little freer.
Yeah. And I guess it's, given what we're talking about choices, it's just the freedom to make the choices you want. How free are any of us in, where we've got bills to pay, we've got, expectations from friends and family, right? We have all this stuff, but, in life happens to you, but you can make the choices within that. And how am I going to respond to the different challenges and things like that? And, there's, what is it? They say life is 90%. What is it? Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to
Yeah.
that. Sometimes bad stuff happens and you can let it either completely crush you or you can at least move on and kind of rise from it.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely. Well, Andy, I want to thank you so, so much. This is just absolutely great. All of the little tidbits you've given us and all of the things you've given us to think about. Um, I really appreciate it and sharing your story and taking your time with us. Is there anything, last minute things that you want to leave with our listeners?
Um, no, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm loving what you're doing and the spirit and the soul behind what you're doing here. I think I probably the obviously, anybody can come and see a bit more about what I do at soberinseven.com. Um, and all the socials are sober in seven, just the words rather than the actual digit. But if you do a Google search or something like that, you'll find me. But I think if you're struggling with whether it's alcohol, whether it's food, whether it's gambling, pornography or whatever, it all starts with why. It all starts with why would I want to have something different? And if you can get that straight in your head in a positive way, then everything kind of flows from there. It's very churlish to say, well, don't beat yourself up about it and things like that because everybody does. But if you can just focus on the positive, go right, okay, I how will my life improve? Why is it in my interest to do this? If you can get clear on that question, then everything that happens downstream is easier. And just follow your heart. Your subconscious mind talks to you with feelings. Rivers flow in one direction. Don't try and swim upstream. Just allow it to guide you. And yeah, there, and just seek help. Whether it's me, whether it's somebody else. If something resonates with you, you go, actually, this feels like this could teach me something or this could help me, follow that and just explore it. And then maybe it'll run out of puff and you go and you find something else. And it starts this amazing journey. You know, when I started this out, there was nothing in there about, you know, I basically had two goals when I got sober. One was to not die, and the other one was to not get thrown out of the house. There was nothing in there about helping 6,000 other people, riding the Tour de France, riding to Everest Base Camp, all that kind of stuff. That all came later when I started to ask myself different questions. Right. Oh, okay. I just did something that I thought was impossible. Well, what else have I talked myself out of that I thought, actually, wouldn't that be cool? And now I've just got a bit better at kind of making that a bit more of a priority. So you just never know where it's gonna um, uh, where it's gonna end. So as Ted Lasso would say, be curious, not judgmental.
Oh, I love that. Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much. And definitely anyone that is listening, if you want to learn more about Andy Smith, what he does, who he is, go to soberin7.com or any of the social media. And if you're in the UK or the surrounding area, go to his spin class. It sounds
Yeah, absolutely. Always welcome. Although it's very busy, so you've got to book in early.
well, thank you so much, Andy. And I appreciate you so much and everything you're doing. And
Melody, what an absolute privilege. It really is. It's so lovely to meet you. And you know, that is one of the real upsides to doing what I do now. I get to meet lovely people all over the world. And, you know, that's my little bit for you for today because yeah, I think you're great. And you know, what you're doing, the spirit and the intent behind what you're trying to share here is great. We need more of that in the world. We need more melodies.
oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you.
I mean it.
And to our listeners, just remember that you do not have to struggle alone. So we'll meet up next week. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Lots of love.
Lots of love to you. Bye bye.
Bye.